The legacy of colonial exploitation. 1. Pre-colonial Africa, a flourishing continent. Before the arrival of European colonial powers, Africa was home to vibrant civilizations, powerful kingdoms, and sophisticated trade networks. Empires such as the Kingdom of Congo, Mali Empire, Songhai Empire, and Great Zimbabwe demonstrated economic prosperity, cultural richness, and advanced governance systems. These societies thrived on agriculture, gold trade, ironwork, and cultural exchanges with regions like the Middle East and Asia. Contrary to Western narratives that depict Africa as a primitive land, many African cities were bustling hubs of commerce and scholarship. Timbuktu in Mali, for instance, was renowned for its libraries and Islamic learning institutions. Ancient Kemet, Egypt, Nubia, and Kush thrived with architectural marvels, spiritual sciences, and advanced social systems. Ethiopia's Axum Empire traded extensively with India and the Mediterranean, while the Kingdom of Zimbabwe's stone architecture showcased remarkable engineering skills. Africa's indigenous belief systems and healing practices flourished, with knowledge of herbs, spiritual rituals, and ancestral connections guiding social order. The continent's richness in resources like gold, diamonds, copper, and oil made it a prime target for European exploitation. 2. The scramble for Africa. European powers divide the land. The late 19th century saw European powers carving up the African continent in what is historically known as the Berlin Conference, 1884 to 1885. This conference, orchestrated by Otto von Bismarck, allowed colonial powers such as France, Britain, Belgium, Portugal, and Germany to claim African territories without African consent. Western nations used manipulative treaties, deceit, and violence to annex vast regions, ignoring established cultural and ethnic boundaries. This colonial conquest aimed to extract Africa's immense natural wealth. Key territories were assigned as follows. France controlled West Africa, including Senegal, Ivory Coast, and Mali. They forced their colonies into adopting French language, culture, and economic systems, ensuring long-term dependency. Britain secured Egypt, South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, strategically focusing on resource extraction and trade routes such as the Suez Canal. Belgium. Under King Leopold II, Belgium turned the Congo into a brutal personal kingdom, exploiting rubber plantations and ivory markets. Millions of Congolese were mutilated or killed under his rule. Portugal dominated Angola and Mozambique, establishing brutal labor camps to extract diamonds, coffee, and cotton. Germany controlled Namibia, Cameroon, and Tanzania. Their violent campaigns against the Herero and Nama people resulted in genocides. This division deliberately destabilized Africa's internal unity, ensuring European dominance. 3. Economic exploitation, resources, labor, and wealth extraction. The colonial economic model relied on draining Africa's resources to fuel Western industries. Colonizers imposed taxation systems that forced Africans to work in mines, plantations, and infrastructure projects under inhumane conditions. In Congo, Leopold II's exploitation of rubber plantations claimed over 10 million Congolese lives. British-controlled gold and diamond mines in South Africa, such as those run by De Beers under Cecil Rhodes, generated immense wealth for Europe while leaving African workers impoverished. The CFA franc, imposed by France in West and Central Africa, ensured these countries remained economically dependent long after independence. France continues to exploit this currency system to siphon wealth from 14 African nations. Modern corporations like Apple, Tesla, and Nestlé heavily rely on Africa's resources. For instance, Congolese children mine cobalt, a critical element for smartphone batteries, under hazardous conditions, while Western tech giants reap massive profits. 4. Cultural and religious suppression. Beyond economic exploitation, colonial forces attacked Africa's spiritual and cultural systems. European missionaries promoted Christianity as a tool for mental and social control, depicting indigenous beliefs as backward and evil. The Bible was used to pacify African resistance, convincing people that submission was divine will. Many traditional spiritual practices, which held deep wisdom about healing, ancestors, and cosmic forces, were demonized. African languages were suppressed to enforce Eurocentric education systems. Indigenous languages like Kikongo, Zulu, and Amharic were discouraged in favor of English, French, and Portuguese. This linguistic control fractured African identity and made colonial powers the gatekeepers of knowledge. 5. Political disruption and social fragmentation. Colonialism deliberately divided African societies along ethnic and tribal lines to prevent unity. The artificial borders drawn by European powers ignored established territories, creating long-term ethnic tensions that persist today. For instance, Nigeria's forced merger of Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa territories resulted in political instability. Rwanda's Belgian colonizers fostered animosity between Hutu and Tutsi populations, ultimately fueling the 1994 genocide. Figures like Patrice Lumumba, Congo, Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso, and Amilcar Cabral, Guinea-Bissau, attempted to unite African nations under Pan-African ideals. Western-backed assassinations and coups repeatedly targeted these leaders to maintain Western dominance. 6. The lingering impact. Modern economic challenges and underdevelopment. Despite gaining independence, African economies remain shackled by neo-colonialism. Western corporations and banks control industries like oil, mining, and agriculture, keeping Africa dependent on exporting raw materials instead of producing finished goods. The IMF and World Bank's economic policies have further undermined Africa's development by imposing debt structures that limit infrastructure growth and social welfare. France's persistent control over the CFA. France continues to hinder economic independence for nations like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Ivory Coast. 7. Africa's fight for independence and the road ahead. African leaders have consistently resisted Western dominance. Kwame Nkrumah led Ghana to become the first independent African nation in 1957, inspiring a wave of liberation movements. However, Western sabotage through coups and economic manipulation continues to destabilize the continent. Today, Africa faces a new challenge: the geopolitical power struggle between the West and China. While Western powers exploit Africa without significant investment, China has taken a different approach. Although China extracts resources, it also builds infrastructure such as roads, railways, and schools. This has positioned China as an alternative partner for African nations seeking economic growth. The war in Ukraine, increasing tension with Russia, and declining Western economies are further motivating Western leaders to tighten their grip on Africa. Countries like France, heavily reliant on African resources, have responded aggressively as their influence wanes. Conclusion. The exploitation of Africa by Western powers has roots in centuries of colonial abuse, economic theft, and cultural manipulation. As Africa rebuilds, it faces ongoing interference from nations determined to control its resources. The struggle for true independence continues as African nations seek to reclaim their wealth, heritage, and spiritual strength. Understanding this complex history is essential to uncovering the true motives behind today's global conflicts. Mikhail Massa,